Okay, we're finishing the first chapter. Rambam is describing the 5 different sections, pieces, powers of the soul, the nefesh. And we started with the description of number 5, which is either logic or intellect. Yes, and I was telling you about the idea of tzura. So I wanted to go back over that and try to, I didn't complete it yesterday. And it's a subtle concept. I'm not sure that I understand it perfectly well, but I want to get at least the basic concept across. So in the vast majority of things that exist, they have both tzura and chomer, form and matter. And the form of a thing, first of all, defines its identity and usually indicates its function and its value. So you can have, made out of wood, you can have a chair or a table or an arrow or a wood sculpture. They all have different forms, and they all have different functions, and they all have different identities, even though they're all made of wood. Often, you could take the same piece of matter and change it from one form to another form, and change it from one identity to another identity. The body is meant to live. So those things that have living bodies, the nefesh for that body, which is the power that gives it life, is what gives it its definition as a living being and its function to perform the activities of that living being. So starting from that general idea, the nefesh of a human being is going to be that which interacts with the body and gives the body its ability to do the things which are its identity and its purpose. And you have the 5 sections, including the intellect. Now, if I think about an animal, let's say bear. So its nefesh enables it to do the things that it does, which basically are the things which keep it alive and enable it to procreate, to preserve the species. That's all it does. Yeah, I know baby bears play and so forth and so on, but that's what its life is about. Its life is about surviving and reproducing. Well, surviving and reproducing is important for people also. They need to do that. And the nefesh that they have enables them to do that. Indeed, given that we are physically weak, the fact that we have an intellect which enables us to cooperate with others and create tools that enable us to do things plays a role analogous to the role of the nefesh for an animal. Only analogous, as we said before, because each species has its own identity. Everything that happens to an item in that species is for that specific identity. But then you have also the intellect. Now the intellect, as we will see, applies to activities like surviving and reproducing, but the intellect goes beyond that. The intellect goes beyond that to consider what the world is and how the world works and what the basis is and where it comes from and whether it has a manager, capital M, and what the manager's will is for the world. The intellect of a human being goes much farther than the intellect of any other creature. And now when the intellect is searching, when it's analyzing, investigating, it hasn't yet achieved knowledge. It's shifting in its character, in its nature. I'm investigating whether A is true or B is true. Yesterday I was working on it. It really seemed to me like A was true. I was ready to put my vote in for A. But then last night I got a telephone call. Somebody told me about a whole article that I wasn't aware of. I looked it up. I changed my mind. A looks like it's much worse than B. So I haven't finished the investigation yet. Now what's going on? Well, my mind was oriented to A. Now my mind is oriented to B. My mind doesn't have a fixed form at this point. It doesn't have a fixed form. My mind is plastic. Yes, the intellect is functioning, and you might think, and we could start with this as an assumption, though it could be questioned afterwards. You might think the rules of thinking are staying the same, but there's another part of the intellect which isn't just the rules of thinking, it's the knowing. And that's plastic still. That's still shifting. It achieves its form only when you've arrived at Das. And as he will say in the next chapter, if the commitment, the committed belief that the intellect adopts is true and well supported, then it's knowledge, and that's the perfection of the soul. The perfection of the soul is to have knowledge about the world. So now, that's what I was trying to explain yesterday, that the idea of the nefesh, vis-a-vis the body, the nefesh gives the body its ability to be a live and functioning body. So in that respect, the nefesh plays the role of form, tsura, for the body. But then when you look carefully at the intellect, at the nefesh of the person, it includes the intellect which itself is in flux, itself is unstable. So it's like matter looking for a form. Even though vis-a-vis the body, its form, in terms of its own nature, it's like matter looking for a form. And the Rambam says that's actually correct. The form of the soul, the nefesh of a person, is the knowledge that he has. Of course, that applies to that one section, the fifth section, the highest section, which is called intellect. But that then defines the identity of the person and fixes the value of the person. The value of the person is fixed by the intellect that he has, the knowledge that he has. So let me complete the picture for a second, then I'll take your question. Now, if I say those words, I'm going to leave you with a misimpression. So let me just add one more thing. Knowledge isn't inert. Knowledge isn't like possessing a gold ring. Knowledge also dictates what you should do. So this forming of the nefesh also creates a new extra function for the body, and that is to carry out the dictates of the knowledge that it has. So this is like a super form. It's a super form. If I could give you an analogy, maybe it's like a violin where all the strings are loose and flabby, and then you tighten them and tune them. It had strings before, but you couldn't play any music on it. And now when you tighten them, you can play music on it. Here, having the intellect, just having the intellect, and using it to attend to the bodily functions of the physical functions of the body, would be having, just like the Darwinians would have you believe that you are a slightly smarter squirrel, that's all you would be, a slightly smarter squirrel. But the truth is that the intellect is much more than that. And then when the intellect gets translated into action of the body itself takes on an entirely new, superior form. It's like a person who's in a slum who works fixing cars, and that's how he lives, and somebody says, I've analyzed you and you could be a surgeon, so I'm going to teach you surgery. Well, he has a different form now. He's a surgeon. He saves lives. He's earning a lot of money. He's mastered a very difficult and complicated and time-consuming skill, which very few people have mastered. He has a different life. Here it's even going to be more than that, much more than that, because the truths that you're going to achieve by exercising your intellect change your whole picture of the world and the whole purpose of what you're living for. There's a creator, and the creator has a will, and your whole life is worth something only to the extent to which you act out his will. It's going to be a revolution in the... So this is something to understand the way in which the soul of the person plays the role of form for the body, but then within the soul there's the intellect. And the intellect, I'm describing it now, has two parts. There's a procedural part. This is how you go about finding knowledge. And then there's the achievement and recording of the knowledge. And the knowledge is what's the form of the soul. And that form gives it its identity and gives it its value, its function, and its value. Okay, it's not 100%, but that's the best I can do. Yeah.
Sure. So what was the perfection of the soul? It comes from this acquisition of knowledge and its embodiment.
Well, to inquire it means to embody it somehow. It's got to be in you, recorded somehow.
But not just in the mind, so to speak. That is to go look to have be at A, identify B as being worthwhile to embody, and in some way replace.
Oh, you're using.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see now. If let me do it in my terminology and
Okay.
see if I'm answering your question or not. Let's take the activity of science. So, a caricature which is worthy of a 7-year-old is, you see things happening and you wonder why they happen, so you think up a theory which might explain it, and then you test the theory to see if it's true, and if it passes enough tests, you at least tentatively adopt it as true, and you use it as your information. Okay? So it's the process of thinking up the theory, the process of testing the theory, the process of deciding you have enough evidence, and then there's accepting the theory, adopting it, and using it as information.
Yes.
Now, the purpose of science is to get to the information. The purpose of science is not to make analyses and say, look, I've been analyzing for 50 years, didn't get to a theory, but that's great. I've been analyzing for 50 years, that's science. No, science is getting to the theories, thank you. It's supposed to be getting to the explanations and explaining and showing to me the way the world works.
Yes.
That's the glory of science, when it works. And they sometimes think it works and it doesn't. Okay, that's another story. So it's that status of, in the intellect, there's a process of analyzing, and then there's arriving at a conclusion.
Yes.
And arriving at that conclusion means you now have a belief which is true about the world and its knowledge about the world. My point was to go on to say, it's not as if you're writing a book of truths about the world and you wrote another page. And when you get to the end of your life, you got a 25-page book. And that's what you did. You had a 25. No, because these things aren't sitting in a book. These pieces of knowledge about the world also dictate what you are to do. They filter down back to the lower parts and take control of them and manage them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
So that it's essential that this knowledge changes the activities of the lower parts as well. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. That's what I was trying to understand.
Okay. Good.
Sorry, there was.
No problem. This is Rabbi Shalom. You have to be able to ask.
I'm going to go first and then come back around to me.
So under these terms, emuna would be a form of the soul, a knowledge, a das from the world, which it's...
I guess emuna is a word that needs a translation. Yeah, you heard? Oh, very
Yes.
good, very good. So emuna is not belief. We had it 2 parshios ago, right? Vayihi yadav emuna ad bo hashamesh. His hands were emuna last week, until the sun went down. And the hands don't believe anything. They don't have faith in anything. Right? It says Vayihi yadav emuna. Right? So emuna can sometimes be understood as being faithful to, or emuna can mean accepting something as true on the basis of trusting, where the trusting is rational. You have reason to trust. It's justified to trust without your having investigated it yourself. So you can. I mean, in different contexts, you could use it in different ways. But the Rambam here is talking about knowledge. And for him, knowledge is something which you have verified. Indeed, he distinguishes, and the Gemara distinguishes, it's almost shocking, between Torah and Chachma. Torah is what you receive from the tradition and accept it because you trust the tradition to be true, and that's not Chachma. Chachma is when you have established it by your own understanding and reasoning. And that's superior. And he takes it from a Gemara, I think in Megillah, that Moses is called Av B'Torah, Av B'Nevuah, Av B'Torah, and Av B'Chachma. He's the master, the greatest in prophecy, the greatest in Torah, and the greatest in Chachma. So the Gemara there distinguishes Torah from Chachma. But doesn't say any more about it, doesn't explain what Torah is, what Chachma is, how to define them, but it definitely is open for understanding. That's why the Rambam understands it. So here we're talking about something that would be called Chachma. It's knowledge. Yeah.
My other question would be this: just trying to understand this idea of the form and superform, the tzura and super tzura. Is the tzura the starting point for the soul based on the accumulation of one's experiences up until a certain point in time, and say at a certain point in time they decide to now investigate their value system, and they decide to try and inform, they use their intellectual faculty to try and inform themselves of a higher order way of being, and when they do that, it's like the strings become tighter when they come across ways of being and value systems that are higher than their current value systems.
I think you're overrating the idea here. I think what I'm calling investigation starts at about age 9 months.
Okay, and so what?
When not value systems and not the alternatives and studying ancient Chinese history.
Yes.
Talk about 9 months.
Yes.
Right. Gee, when I drank out of the cup, it was fizzy, and now I'm drinking out of the cup, it's not fizzy. What happened? What happened? How come? Well, I mean, he notices that. You know about object constancy? This is absolutely incredible. I think kids do this when they're 3 months old or 4 months old. You have a screen, and you take an apple, and you pass it to the screen behind the screen, and then a few moments later, the apple comes out on the other end of the screen, where the child can see it, and he sits there and he, just watches. Then you do it again. Take an apple and approach the screen, put it behind the screen, and from the other side, take out a puppy. Oh, he's shocked. What happened? Because he already has expectations that when you put an apple behind the screen, an apple's going to come out. And he's shocked. And then, he has to assimilate that. So already, the idea of something shocking and not normal and needing adjustment is already there very, very early on. This kind of investigation I'm talking about is built into, without, where are my keys? I thought I left them on the table. Do I have to go downstairs and check? I asked my son, do you ever see my keys on the table? Yeah, Dad, they're on the table. Okay, I take it for granted on the table. I didn't see them myself, but I did ask him, and he's usually reliable. Still, sometimes he isn't reliable. I need the keys tomorrow, I better go down and check myself. But this goes on all the time. This is low-level stuff.
Yeah.
Right? You can't live without carrying out investigations like this.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
So what is the difference between the surah and super surah, and with the definition of surah being the form of the soul?
No, the surah is the soul itself.
Oh.
The surah is the form. Surah means form, and the soul is the form. And it's for animals, the soul is the form of the animal is composed of form and matter. What's called its soul is its form, and its body is its matter. And as we said, the function of the soul on an animal is to enliven the body and to direct the functions of the body which are necessary for the body to operate. So it'll be growth and nutrition and locomotion and reproduction and sensation, right? All those things animals have. And it's the soul that gives the body the ability to carry out those functions. Because without the soul, the body's dead.
I think I might get it. I think I might have it. So the idea is that this maybe the super form, the super surah, is then the actions that one.
No. So now again, think of this basic point, which is all the analogies are based on. The matter is something which can take on a tzura or not take on. The matter is the wood, and the tzura is being a chair, or being a table,
Yeah, okay.
or being an arrow,
Yes.
or being a statue, or whatever. Right? It's all wood, but
Identity.
right. Okay. So now you've got this piece of flesh here. Well, it could be a functioning animal, or it's just dead, right? So the tzura is what enables it to be a functioning animal,
Okay.
which we say giving life. So, and that tzura is its nefesh, its soul, and its soul directs its digestion and its locomotion and its sensation and its reproduction and all the other things that it does. It enlivens it in very specific ways and enables it to perform very specific functions. So now, both the material and the soul are fully specified.
Okay. Yes.
Chair is chair. It's not table, it's not, and it's, lounge chair, or it's breakfast chair, or, right, they're both fully specified.
Yeah.
The unique element in the human being is that when you talk about his nefesh, which is what enlivens his body, and you look at the capabilities that it has, there's a part of the nefesh which isn't fully specified. It's fluid. It's changing all the time. It acquires a certain shape or a certain structure or a certain content, and then it loses that content and goes to other content. So this part of the surah of the human being functions more like matter than it functions like surah. Because it takes on different shapes, it takes on different structures, it takes on different qualities. Well, the thing that changes and takes on different qualities is matter, not form. So this part of what we call the form of the human being functions more like matter than form. And then there's its form. And this piece of the human soul, which takes on different forms, is his understanding, his knowledge system. And the knowledge system is changing all the time. You're learning new things all the time. You are also learning to discard old things which weren't correct. So the content of your knowledge is changing all the time. The content of your vision isn't changing all the time, unless you have a problem with your eyeballs. Right? And the content of your toes isn't changing all the time, but the content of your knowledge is changing all the time. So this knowledge function is fluid, and then the question is, what is the form of that knowledge function? And the answer is, the form of that knowledge function is true knowledge, real knowledge. When it possesses that knowledge, then it's got the form. There's something, this is for
Thank you.
those, you're welcome. There's something called the active intellect. And the active intellect is something which knows everything always. The word active there doesn't mean that it goes to the shop and buys a coffee. Active intellect means that it never passes from potential to actual. It never passes from potential to actual. It's fully actualized all the time. It's related to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Either he creates it or is an expression of his activity in a certain way. It has a certain expression of the divine in it. Our intellects aren't like that. And this is the difference between the human intellect and the divine intellect. Divine intellect is always actual, whereas we go from potential to actual over and over and over again. And when you hear the words that the knower and the knowing and the known thing are all one, that does not distinguish human beings from the divine. According to Rambam, human knowledge has that feature also. That's a feature of knowledge.
What's the feature?
I'm just saying it. I'm not going to explain it. It's in the literature. It's both in the Mishnah Torah and the Morah, more the Morah. That the knower and the knowing and the known thing are all identical. I'm just saying, people think of that as somehow describing only God. That's wrong. Rambam says that people are like that also. That's just an element of knowledge. The difference between God's knowledge and our knowledge is that his knowledge is complete, absolute, accurate, and unchanging. Whereas our knowledge is going from, our ability to know is going from potential to actual all the time. It's making that transition all the time. And indeed, he would say your potential to know becomes actual with real knowledge because of the connection you have with the active intellect. Because only intellect can influence intellect. That's the basic structure. But from our point of view, since the knowledge faculty of the human soul is changing its content all the time, it doesn't operate like a real form. Forms have a definition and they don't change. By definition, they don't change because change means discarding one form and it's accepting another form, right? The wood in the table can be a wood of chair, or it can be firewood, or it can be other things, because the same wood takes on different forms. That's what change is, the same material going from form to form. The box was white, I painted it black, so now it's black, right? So the box is the box, and the color changes. And the color changes because I painted it. It had the form of a color white, and now it has the form of color black. The form of square doesn't change from four-sided to five-sided. Five-sided is a pentagon, it's not a square. So, but now, in the human soul, you have this kind of intermediary idea where the soul as a whole is a form for the body. But on the other hand, part of the soul is fluid. Unlike other forms, part of this form is fluid. And because it's fluid, it can take on different qualities. And because it can take on different qualities, it's functioning like matter. It's not functioning like form. Because qualities are what inform matter. So that's why I called it a superform. It's a form of this form. Because the intellect of the person, vis-a-vis the body, is form, and vis-a-vis knowledge is matter. That's roughly what the Rambam says. It comes out that the knowledge of the person becomes his real identity, his real definition, and his real value. But again, so that you're not misled by that, like the whole of the academic world, it doesn't mean you sit there and write pages in your knowledge book and then, and then go to sleep. Because this knowledge dictates how you should live. So it then reflects back on all the rest of what you do. It's not separate from what you do. It's a key point that Rambam stresses over and over again, which somehow in academia is often overlooked. Yeah.
I'm seeing a picture like like the concept of madrega would fit very well. Like there's like different potentials, and once they raise certain levels, sometimes they come together and then they can go together. Like it's like constant building madrega in the soul and like.
Well, that's certainly true for knowledge,
Right.
because knowledge interacts.
Yeah.
And especially if you learn Gemara, you could be talking about civil law and bring a proof from sacrifices, and from there to kosher food, and I mean all the knowledge in the Gemara is integrated and interlocking. So I think that's right. When you come to an insight in one area, that often leads to insights in other areas, especially if you study Tosfos. You're doing that all the time. Okay, so that's one feature of the human soul, and the fifth part of the human soul, which is the intellect. And you see, this now gives you a contrast. There are many sources which describe this contrast, but it gives you a contrast here between the Torah's point of view and the false picture of the Greeks. For the Greeks, the human being was defined as a rational animal. Reason is a process. It's a process of analysis, a process of investigation, and even a process of deciding what to believe. But it's not the product. Reason isn't the product of knowledge. It's the process by which you acquire knowledge. For the Rambam, the definition of a being is a knowing being, not a reasonable being. It's not the process, it's the product. If you spent your whole life reasoning, and reasoning well, and arrived at no conclusions, your life is a failure. For Aristotle, it would be a great success, because you were reasoning the whole time.
Can you repeat that?
If for the Rambam, if you spent your whole life reasoning, and reasoning well, reasoning with fidelity to the appropriate laws of reasoning, and arrived at no conclusions, for the Greeks, you would have lived an exquisite life, been expressing rationality your whole life, and for the Rambam, your life would be a total failure. Reason is only a means by which you can get to beliefs, the correct beliefs, knowledge. Okay, so now he says the logical part of the human being contains the ability to make investigations and to acquire chokhmos. Now this is a translation of Arabic, as I keep saying, wisdoms, disciplines, and as I said last time, a person distinguishes between good and evil. And I mentioned that, and I told you that there are many sources on that. It's extremely important. The creation of the human being gives him the capacity to understand good and evil. As I told you yesterday, it means that you have the capacity to develop this understanding if you undergo certain standard experiences. It's like your capacity for language. You're not born talking. You're not born understanding a language. And I'm aware of Chomsky. But you're born with the ability to develop it, given the Chomskyan idea that most of it's pre-programmed under certain stimuli. If the stimuli aren't there, you won't have a language. So I think the good and evil is the same thing. And he specifies good and evil of actions. So those who have studied Kant will hear echoes here. I mean, Kant echoing the Rambam. That good and evil applies only to the will and nothing else. Okay. Now, these actions that are going to be performed, he says, some of them are practical, translation here is ma'asi, and some of them are analytical, meaning intellectual in the sense of analysis. Now, a further subdivision. And the practical ones are ones that are for the performance of the body and also for his thought. And on the other hand, the intellectual ones, that's how a person knows the items in the existence that don't change. The unchanging items in existence. Unchanging items in existence. And that's how he knows them. What would that be?
HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Say again?
HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Okay. The word here is plural. We can certainly put the Kodesh Baruch Hu into that category. But what about more pedestrian things? Are you familiar of ever having acquired about unchanging things that never change?
Doesn't everything change?
Real estate.
I mean, that's what's it?
Real estate, it doesn't change.
Certainly does. I asked cousins whether real estate changes. What about numbers? How about the number 6? When's the last time you read about a change in the number 6? Did it become worth more or less? Did it change its color, its composition, its strength, its location? It used to be in Nebraska and then it moved to Texas. I mean, the numbers change?
No.
I don't think so.
Alphabet?
Sorry?
Alphabet as well then, or?
Alphabet. I mean, I don't know what that means. You have something called the letter A, but then we do say that the letter A has changed its shape over time. How you classify the letter, if you want to call it an abstract shape, I'm coming to that in a moment. But that could be an ambiguous case. Let's give another example. So another thing is qualities. Properties, characteristics, right? Square. Square doesn't change from 4 sides to 5 sides. 5 sides is a pentagon, it's not a square, right? Square is square. Or sky blue. Sky blue is a color. Your suit may fade. It was sky blue and now it's gray. That could happen. But the color sky blue doesn't change. So there are definitely things in our everyday world that we think about and have information about that don't change. Take geometry. Geometry, now this is the whole, philosophy of geometry, we know about that. A whole long story, but the one standard idea is that geometry is about ideal figures. A line is something which has only one dimension, length. No width and no breadth. Two-dimensional figures like a circle have only 2 dimensions, no thickness. You won't find that in the ring shop because the rings have thickness because they're physical. So what is geometry about? Well, geometry is about these figures. And that's why you can get theorems that are exact. Because in the real world, the things that we have that are circular aren't really perfectly circular. And therefore, when you calculate the difference, the relationship between the diameter and circumference, you won't get exactly pi because things in the physical world aren't exact. But in geometry, you prove that it's pi. So geometry is about things that don't change. So we have a lot of disciplines that give us information about things that don't change. And in a certain sense, they are among the strongest disciplines we have because the results that we get are almost absolutely stable. We have proofs in mathematics from 2,300 years ago, and they are unquestioned for 2,300 years, and all over the world, and different political systems, and different economic systems, and different religious systems, but the infinity of primes stays the infinity of primes. End of story. Doesn't change. So that's quite remarkable that you have the ability with the human intellect to establish things which seem to be, in some sense, absolute. When I said that the acquiring of good and evil is like the acquiring of numbers, and it is, but look at the difference in the outcome. Good and evil, there's gigantic disagreement about the basic propositions of good and evil. And when you start acquire numbers and develop the concepts of mathematics, there's almost no disagreement at all. Okay, I taught philosophy of mathematics, so there are the constructivists and there are intuitionists and all the others who have their worries about the axioms and so on, but they are like 1/10 of 1% of the working mathematicians. Working mathematicians are basically Platonists. Yeah.
attributes like kindness, discipline, and duty fall into this characteristic of unchanging?
So I think this is a very tricky question. It's a nice way. First of all, there's a lot of disagreement as to what those qualities are.
Yes.
That's not change. That's just unclarity.
Yes.
And by the way, you should keep in mind that there are two different types of failures of clarity. One is where there's disagreement, and one's where there's personal, individual confusion.
Mm.
And very often, the lack of clarity is that everybody's confused and they know they're confused. So they're not disagreeing, they just admit that they don't know what to say. And qualities like that, moral qualities, suffer from both kinds of unclarity, which means that it's not settled what the quality is. And there are revolutions in these things. People change their minds, and so it's unstable. But that doesn't mean the quality's changing. That means that that our understanding of the quality is changing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have what some people want to call moral revolutions, where they want to say that some applications of the quality changes. But as I told you yesterday, when you talk about morality, you have to distinguish carefully between moral rules versus moral decisions. And the key difference is that a moral rule is pure, it's just what is right and what's wrong, whereas a moral decision is based both on your moral rules and your information about the world. And when a concrete moral decision changes, it may be not because your rules are changing, but your conception of the world is changing. And that being the case, it's very difficult to draw implications. When you see varieties in different societies where the rules by which they operate are the actions that they take in the name of morality in their lives are quite different, you can't just infer that they're operating according to different rules. So it's a complicated issue. But we would say when you have a well-defined characteristic doesn't change. You may not want to use it anymore. You may find it not useful anymore, and you might want to trade it for something else. You know? But characteristic doesn't change. When there was a whole debate, a fellow named Thomas Saz wrote a book called The Myth of Mental Illness. He wanted to claim that mental conditions shouldn't be called illness. That's not because he was changing the concept of illness. He was saying that calling a mental illness is a mistake. You don't understand what's going on with these mental conditions. And if you understood them, you would realize that calling them illness is a mistake. It wasn't challenging the quality of illness and saying it should be changed into another quality. He was saying it doesn't apply. That's why his thesis had content. Otherwise, he'd just be lobbying for a different thought system, which you could do also, but it's a different type of procedure. Anyway, so when the Rambam says that we're talking here about the knowledge of things that don't change, so he's talking about that, and also certain types of philosophy, like metaphysics. And the Rambam has a chapter in the Guide where he talks about impossibilities, and one impossibility is that a square should have a diagonal equal in length to its side. Okay, you understand that right away. He also said it's impossible we have objects and we have qualities. It's impossible for an object to become a quality, or a quality to become an object. They're two different realms. And the realms don't allow a process of becoming to cross from one to the other. So, as we said, a chair could become a table, a chair could become firewood, a chair could become a statue, but a chair can't become the color brown, because a chair is an object and not a quality. So, and that is insight. That's insight when you think about it, and you compare them, and you understand what the process of change is. You understand that's also about things that don't change. The nature of objects, the nature of qualities, and that there's an unbridgeable gap between them is something that's fixed. It's not going to change tomorrow. Yeah, it used to be impossible, but it's not impossible anymore. That's not going to happen. Just like the number 6 isn't going to get bigger, isn't going to get smaller. Right? It's because it's the number 6. So there's a certain level of philosophy where we achieve results of this as well. This is what he calls called here iyun. There's a kind of analytical quality that you have, and that he says is for the sake of achieving knowledge of these things that don't change. Yeah.
And I kind of see like Plato somehow helping or close in the sense of the essence of things and how those things are something that doesn't change. It's like a constant and like some sort of like superior knowledge and like.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm maybe we should sort of try to take a step back. Is there any reason to think that all things change? Do you think you have in your mind an encyclopedia of all things? Surely you are aware that there's some things you haven't thought about, some things you haven't heard of. Where would you have a starting point? Yeah, okay, maybe I don't know about the birds of Antarctica, but everything changes, that's for sure. Everything all things have to change. Maybe not. You haven't investigated all the things that people have thought about and talked about, so maybe there are things that don't change. Right? How about electrons? Do electrons change? They're all exactly the same, aren't they? Isn't that strange? Some people are worried about that. Butterflies aren't the same. Even ice crystals aren't the same. Right? Groundhogs aren't the same. Why should electrons all be the same? Why shouldn't there be a variety of them? Bigger ones, smaller ones, so on and so on. The world isn't built that way. Neutrons change, they break down. They come apart. Do protons do that? No one knows. The GUT says yes. We have observations of protons going on, and we've expanded the amount of time that they're expected to last by measuring quadrillions of them at one time in underground reservoirs where the solar rays don't penetrate, and it's not known whether they're unstable or they're stable, right? Photons don't change. So does everything change? I don't see why one should be prejudiced about that. When you hear about numbers, you hear about qualities, you think, okay, so there are things that don't change. Yeah.
Nature, all the concepts we've been talking about, the unchanging nature, they're all abstract concepts, numbers and colors, and so is the property of change a property of that which is physical and is subject to time?
Well, it's surely a property of physical. The question is whether there can be abstract things that change. That's a very good observation. And we have abstract things which act, called malachim, which the Rambam and others say are pure tzura. And that is a complicated concept. That's a very complicated concept, a subtle concept. I don't fully understand it. I don't know if anybody fully understands it. And the Creator is even more than that, because He's beyond being abstract,
Yes.
and yet He's active. And the Rambam testifies that no one can understand the interaction between God and the world. No one can understand that. Just as the Ramchal as a Kabbalist says it, the Rambam as a philosopher says it, it's something that's impossible to understand. Yeah.
Regarding the numbers, you said they change. What about because you mentioned they cannot be attributes and object at the same time, like they're self-sufficient by themselves?
I'm not following all your words. Say it again.
For example, number 6 you said
Yes.
interchangeable.
That's right.
But at the same time, number 6 it's just 3 multiplied by 2, so we can say that we can basically anyway just 3 multiplied by 2. It makes sense.
Why don't you say it's just 8 minus 2? Right.
Also.
So there's an infinity of different equations which are equal to 6. So what?
Yes, I mean they're all similar. They all replace it. So we we could say that, like, for example, square, it's not changeable, but it's just like two triangles, for example.
But what would that give you? I don't see that's relevant to the discussion. So what if it's two triangles?
Change partially, like.
I mean, a triangle is half a square. Why not want to do it that way? What? There are equivalent ways to describe things. That's true. You can do that. You can say a point is the intersection of two lines. There are geometries that start with lines and define points as the intersection of two lines. So what?
Because of different interpretations. It's like not as constant. Like they could be replaced by different similar functions.
Well, the idea of number theory is that you have an ordered set. That's all. And it's the order of the set that carries the qualities of the numbers. Nothing else matters.
Okay, no.
There are many ways in set theory to represent the natural. But even so, whatever it is that you're using, it is what it is, and it doesn't change.
Okay, now I got it.
Now you can think of the number 6 as a quality in a certain ordered set, right? At a certain point in the ordered set. It'll be the same thing. Anyway, that's what the Rambam says about this. We'll pick it up again tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.